Hello everybody, it's Chris from the Collective Imagination here. We're with Scott and Ken Bartle, and we're going to be discussing the courtesy notice that's been released the last few days and has been downloaded by a lot of people. And this discussion is actually in addition to the guidelines that we published with the document itself. We're going to go through quite a lot of things in detail and also discuss some of the sorts of applications that we see for this particular document. So what we'll do first is actually just go over the principle behind the document with Scott and Ken, and just so that everybody's exactly clear on where this came from and how it works. How are you, Scott?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Chris.
Ken, how are you, by the way? We can't forget to say hello to Ken.
I'm good, thanks, Chris, and thanks for patching me in on the conversation. This is wonderful.
It is a pleasure. So, Scott, do you want to lead away?
Yep. Basically, I suppose a lot of people will have heard some of the radio interviews as to how we got to this process. We're essentially doing the same as what the banks have done to us when they cite a judgment from a court. They stand there and point at that judgment left, right and centre. And essentially what we're doing is we now have, in one way, a judgment, and this is these UCC filings that have been done by trustees of the One People's Public Trust to point at and treat as if that's a court judgment. And it boils down to the question, and this is probably a good starting point for a lot of people before they even attempt to use this courtesy notice, is: do you believe that the banks have been foreclosed? Do you believe that the governments have been foreclosed or not? If you believe that they do, and I'm firmly a believer, as having seen all the UCC filings, is that to me is the starting point. And I'm going to point at those UCC filings, and we're using that courtesy notice to do so. So that's the broad sort of overview of what it's there for, and it's there as a courtesy. We were just going through this notice briefly before. It's probably worth jumping, Chris, to the back end of the document.
Yep.
And referring to that section regarding the courtesy. The original notice has been made and has been a recorded fact that's been performed by the One People's Public Trust with the filings with the Washington DC UCC registry, and also on the One People's Public Trust website, peoplestrust1776.org. So that's done. That's public notice being made once.
Yeah, but this is called a courtesy document because it's already been made, and we are being courteous and giving them an opportunity to avail themselves of facts that they might not be aware of. The actual line simply reads: proponent has duly made and given an additional courtesy notice to respondent, meaning this courtesy notice, original notice, is a matter of record made and given by One People's Public Trust. So it's very definitely there. If you want to count them, it's the second time technically that they've been told. But we know most people won't have heard of this, and hence the name.
Okay. Is it worth just jumping in on the proponent-respondent issue just to make sure that that's 100% clear?
Yeah, we just wanted to put that one line in to make sure people understood where the name of the document comes from. And yeah, now we'll jump back to the start of the document if you've got one in front of you. And Scott, just explain the difference between respondent and proponent to begin with.
Well, proponent comes from the word propose. Essentially, you're proposing something, you're putting a proposition forward. And in one sense, you're seeking a response, whether it be written or an action from the respondent. Now, one response may be that they don't do anything. So absolute silence might be the perfect response that you wanted from submitting this courtesy notice. So you've got proponent is yourself, and respondent is the one you're seeking a response from. So
Yep, that's pretty straightforward. Now, up in the underneath respondent private details and proponent private details, well, first of all, private details. Do you want to describe exactly why we're specifying private details?
Yeah, it's all too easy, I suppose, to jump over that point. Basically, because the banks and the governments have been foreclosed upon, the corporations have collapsed. So to address the courtesy notice to the managing director of a company is kind of contradicting yourself in the first line of the document.
Yeah, because if there's no corporations, what are you putting a corporation name there, except, perhaps only as a reference so it gets mailed to the correct address?
Exactly. So that's basically to assist the postal services to get it from point A to point B. So the individual's name is the key, and then we've separated that section out, address for correspondence. We've got care of alleged. Now, essentially, that is where you can put in the department name or bank name. So it'll be care of alleged XYZ bank, care of department for unlawful air conditioning. Whatever it is, that's the alleged entity, because it's all foreclosed on now, and provided for the assistance of the postal services to get it there.
And for the proponent, it's just their name and address.
Yep. And again, there might be some folk who say, "Oh, but we can't use postal codes because that means I'm part of this, and I've got to put my name as of the XYZ family." All of those things have come from the old system. Now, what we're doing now is we're all recognised as beings created of the Creator. So, for me, I'd use what my mum called me when I put my individual's name down. I put what my school teachers used to call me when I was in year one. So, put your name down as to how you'd like it to be and how you are addressed without fear of it meaning something other than a identifier to help something get to you.
Yeah. In other words, the legalese disappeared with the courts.
Exactly.
And all of those correspondence techniques that they used to, trick us and also to, just confuse us.
All the Mr. and the uppercase and the mix of upper and lowercase, all of that is gone because the creators of that have been foreclosed on. So game over.
And I just remind folks, we've talked about this on the radio shows for the last couple of weeks. The lawful landscape is simply the planet Earth with individuals on it. Individuals interacting with individuals. So when someone who thinks they're working for a corporation still comes and slaps a bill on you of some kind, it's actually them, the person, doing it to you, the person. This is why we talk about the alleged organisation, etc. It's just an individual who at this point is ignorant, and we're trying, part of this exercise is we're trying to correct that ignorance, is unlawfully giving you a demand to pay by some kind of leverage. And this is why the entire document is set up in that fashion, and you'll see this reflected through everything else. The way the entire document is written, it's all based on that concept.
If I can speak quickly to the structure, Chris, essentially we're saying, okay, given that the corporations and banks have been foreclosed, the individuals are acting in their unlimited liability. We're dealing on a one-to-one basis as individuals. What we're saying is in the absence of any other contract that they might purport to or claim that exists that would ordinarily compel performance between the two of you, and that needs to be a lawfully binding contract, then what you're saying is if there's none of those things in place, then I'm going to offer my terms to govern the relationship between the two of us. And one of the things that came up in some of the work I was doing was people might say, well, haven't you agreed a contract when you've signed a document with XYZ party? And the answer to that is you may have at the time. However, if that contract was an unlawfully created contract, or it relied on unlawful details or facts that were untrue, that was a unlawfully or a contract that was brought into existence unlawfully. So plus, there's very little likelihood of anyone being able to cite a contract that exists between the two individuals, because up until that point, they've been operating as a corporate entity, even though they're pretending that they're government. They're now hanging out there as individuals.
Yeah, that's something you must bear in mind at all times when you're discussing any aspect of what's going on around us at the moment. And in fact, looking at the title, the re in this document, well, actually, let's go up a notch. First of all, we've got the date, which I don't think we need to describe in detail how to fill in the date. However, underneath that is re, which reads unlimited personal liability arising from foreclosure of all banks, all corporate governments and all other corporations by UCC filing of the One People's Public Trust. There's a clear statement of the purpose of this courtesy notice. We're notifying them of that fact.
Yep. Yep, that's pretty straightforward.
It is. Now, service. Scott, do you want to talk about service?
Yep, basically, as I see it, all it's got to do is you're indicating what method of service you use to get the courtesy notice from your place to their place, point A to point B. It really doesn't matter if it's delivered by stalk. Circle, if you send it by email after you've signed it and scanned it, send it by email. Circle email. Send it by registered mail. Just write in the number that you would ordinarily use to track the registered mail package. And if you use hand delivery, same thing. It's fairly straightforward.
And of course, what we're doing is creating a very minor paper trail of our own, just for tracking purposes.
Exactly. It's quite likely that you may require this courtesy notice or being able to reference when it was received. So, for example, if someone, and this is probably a good time for an example, if you got to the point of invoicing someone as a result of an action that they performed, being their acceptance of your terms and conditions, it's probably good to be able to point to the date and a document that evidences the receipt of that notice with them. So you can say, well, you got the terms and conditions on Monday and you entered into this action, which was the acceptance of the terms and conditions, on Wednesday. So Wednesday is obviously after Monday, so it would be reasonably expected by the people that they had received the terms and conditions and had a chance to consider them. And so when they performed an action on Wednesday, it would be reasonable to accept that they did so, having made the full choice and acceptance of the liability and responsibility or the consequences of their actions. So having the date and the evidence of when the terms and conditions were received is probably a little bit more important than we've given recognition to in the guidelines.
Okay, well that's very good to know. Now we'll move on to the first section of the actual document called Duly Verified Declaration of Facts. So to me it looks like what we're doing here is making a statement about the situation we're drawing their attention to, are we not?
Yes, yeah, this is in some ways some of the background to who we are, and that we are the one of the creators' creations, and the notice that's already been made within the UCC documents. So, for example, you're also reconfirming that you intentionally adopt and reconfirm and ratify those declaration of facts that were laid out within those UCC filings. So that's you're reconfirming what's already been filed by the trustees.
Okay, that pulls it into this document, does it not?
Exactly.
As if it was written in here.
Hmm.
Yep. Okay. Well, the first part of that section is I received a document that purports to be a something or other action. So this would be where you put in the type of document that's been sent to you, and we've added there's an added reference number if they have one.
Yeah, I mean, if we start with a fairly simple one, you could say I received an infringement notice or a parking ticket, and that's something pretty basic. You might be able to give it a reference. Well, you've got the reference number there for it as well, more than likely, and you'll be able to specify who issued this infringement notice. However, sometimes you might find that trying to find the name of the originator of that document is a little difficult.
Yeah, well, some documents are sent out just with a typed department name at the end of them, rather than a personal name of any kind. Certainly not a signature.
Yeah, a perfect example is the lawyers. When they write to you, I've got one not so long ago that says signed Gaydon's Lawyers. And I'm sure their mother didn't call them Gaydon's Lawyers and say, come on Gaydon's Lawyers, you're late for school. They would have had an individual name. And that's a symptom of the old hiding behind the corporate safety net. Sorry fellas, that's all gone.
Absolutely. Yep, it's gone. So, reading it from the start, I received a document that purports to be some kind of action. And are we relying on a piece of paper? For this particular version of the courtesy notice, we're relying on a piece of paper being something you can refer to. Is that the case here?
Exactly. And I'd say in 99% of the situations, you're going to have a piece of paper, partly because they love to produce paper in the old system. Two, they made money off their pieces of paper, and it's a record of what was actually done. You imagine you couldn't exactly get issued a parking ticket without the piece of paper.
Yep.
They'd be ringing you up saying, oh, you parked on this street for 2 hours in a 1 hour parking zone, pay us. And you'd like, well, where's your parking ticket?
Yeah.
So for most situations, I'm pretty sure you're going to run across a document. In the event that you don't, you might be able to reference an incident. So you might be able to say incident which occurred on this date at this location. It's essentially to correlate what happened to the context of what we're discussing in the courtesy notice.
Yeah, well, the wording doesn't necessarily support incidents at this stage, so, well, we're recommending people stick to things that they have a piece of paper to cover.
I would say so, and like I said, I suggest that that's going to be the bulk of people's uses or usages for this notice.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, one of the conversations I had with someone who's going to be using this said, okay, well, if I get pulled over and they give me a speeding fine,
yep,
and I get their details and hand them a notice, I can reference the speeding fine, which would work fine. I mean, we don't recommend actually that you do that unless you're very, very confident that you can handle however it is that the officer responds, because that could be creating a dangerous situation for you. So I don't recommend actually doing that, but you could. And if, for instance, you'd done something that caused them to simply arrest you and put you in their car, what would you do?
We're getting into some fairly, let's say, rare circumstances for the vast majority of the population. Else those cars and their buildings that they take you to would be a lot fuller than they are.
Sure. Look, I have a specific reason for doing this, and the reason is this: that even if they took you down to the station and processed you in somehow, they're going to hand you a piece of paper,
They will, yes.
and that piece of paper becomes the basis for the duly verified declaration of facts. So if that does happen to occur, again, we're still looking for a piece of paper.
Yep. If you looked at it this way, if you didn't have that piece of paper, it would make your follow-up a lot harder. So in many ways, thank you for your piece of paper. Now I will do something with it. So you can go back home and in the comfort of your own surroundings, fill out the courtesy notice and send it back to XYZ officer who originated the piece of paper that you've got. So do it after the fact and just be very observant of everything that takes place during your encounter, and basically they're another human being as well. They're just not aware of what's going on. And if I can add to this point here, if you take it upon yourself to tell them what's happening on that in that particular situation, I would suggest that what is likely to happen is that their eyes will glaze over, they'll shut down and sort of be wondering when they can be finished with this situation, write you your ticket and get out of there. Telling them in that situation is not likely to be received terribly well.
Yeah, we've had many discussions about situations where it's unwise to do this, and even in the guidelines, roadside conversations with policy officers is not recommended, and also confrontations with judges in courtrooms during court sessions is also certainly not recommended. It's a private communication between you and that person, and you can do it before the court case by some of the means and avoid all the drama.
Yeah, exactly. Long distance is one way to look at it. You're sitting in your armchair and you're hitting the send button on your email, and it's delivered to his screen or her screen at the other end, and all done quite amicably. It's not
Indeed.
done with any "you have to do this" kind of stuff. That's removed.
It's a courtesy notice after all. We're being courteous here. So that section, I receive a document that purports to be something or other action with a reference number from and with address of, really are just going to be exactly the same as proponent, I nearly fell into that trap there, as respondent private details, including the word alleged if you use a title, I presume.
Yes. If you're going to use the title there, use alleged. So yeah, from Bill Smith, Jill Jones, whoever it is from, with the address of blah blah blah, and then hereafter respondent. So that's again defining them in the legal sense that they are the respondent.
Indeed. So, and the next letter simply directly references. Next paragraph directly references the filings as we discussed, and points that directly at the proponent, who is oneself.
Yeah.
So yeah. We've actually used this paragraph as set up who is the respondent, who is the proponent, legally from a lawful point of view.
Yeah.
Now note that I dropped the word legal there because we're not in a legal landscape anymore. We're in a lawful landscape, so we have to kind of rearrange our use of language.
Yeah, it's a sad state that words like that have been sort of twisted in many ways. I mean, we've been quite reluctant recently to use the word government, just because of the connotations of what that means now for a lot of people is you just don't want to use it anymore.
Indeed. So next section, duly verified notice. Now, I might read this out because we need to make sure that this actually gets into people's heads very firmly, these next three paragraphs, because it is part of the guts of the actual proposition that we're putting to them, because we're making a proposal to these guys. So the first paragraph is this: proponent duly gives and makes notice to respondent that proponent does not consent to any unlawful and illegal devaluing, diminishing, abrogating, subjugating, subordinating, usurping, invading, violating, or theft of proponent's duly secured being, any and all creations therefrom and property thereof. Respondent is duly ordered to cease and desist any and all said unlawful and illegal actions against proponent effective immediately. Now, first of all, I notice that the word illegals appearing in here. Any opinion on why that's there, Scott? Is it just so that the language communicates what we're after?
Sorry, you're breaking up a little bit there. You mentioned about the illegal and unlawful?
Yes.
I think it's just to make absolutely certain that that's exactly what's happening. Covers both bases. I mean, I've often used the distinction that lawful pertains to a certain moral or right, whereas legal is
Statutory.
a constructive situation that doesn't necessarily have any morality or ethics attached to it. So you could have, in that sense, you can have legal fraud, but you can't have lawful fraud.
Indeed. Indeed. Interesting distinction. Okay, so that paragraph lists all the things that we do not consent to. Okay, and the respondent is ordered to stop.
Yes.
At that point. Okay, next paragraph. Proponent duly makes and gives you due notice that respondent is lawfully and legally responsible and liable in principal and triple damages under common law for any and all unlawful and illegal actions against proponent by respondent and resulting in any and all damage to proponent, inclusive of physical harm, physical detention, property seizure, property damage, financial damage, or any other damage of proponent's measurable energy. I like that. I like that.
It feels good.
Yeah, so do you want to give the very quick wrap-up for that paragraph?
Yeah, well, that's making use upon the common law that's been returned to the people as a result of the UCC filings. Now that's our remedy in law. So that's not even what we're talking about further on when we're proposing terms and conditions. This is damages for action incurred where the enforcement for that damage comes and the remedy available to us is through the UCC filings of through a three-stage demand process. That's probably a conversation for another time for another discussion. But,
yes, so this document obviously doesn't head in that direction directly. And we'll get down to the contract side of it shortly. But essentially, this paragraph to me is literally saying to the respondent that they are personally and legally liable. It's completely on them. They're acting as an individual. It's confirming that yet again.
Yep.
Okay. So next paragraph, respondent's attention is directed to the declaration of facts, specifically the foreclosure in late 2012 of the World's Corporation operating under the guise of the People's Governments, banks, and all other corporations for cause of treason against and the damage of the one people of this planet without their knowing, willing, and intentional consent, specifically, and then we list the major things that have happened.
I love that paragraph. Particularly close to my heart is the operating under the guise of the people's governments.
Absolutely, yep. It nails it. For cause of treason against and the damage of the one people.
Mm-hmm. Without their knowing.
Willing
and intentional consent.
Yep. Nails it very nice.
That's the slavery system that we've been in.
Yep. So that fact was declared under the UCC, and that was the rebuttal of the filings, or should I say, the non-rebuttal of the filings that this whole thing is listed on.
Exactly.
Following that paragraph is a couple of quotes Can you hang on a second? I've just got to do something here. Hang on there. I've got a dogfight going on here.
Righto. Well, I'll just keep on talking as if Chris is not there. Government charters cancelled. This is coming from Declaration of Facts, UCC document 2012-127914. We're basically talking about the cancellation of the charters for the United States federal government and any and all international equivalents. Now, I'd like to see some government or pretend government from some country, let's just say Australia, for example, come along and say, oh, no, it doesn't mean us. We're not an international law equivalent.
But it does.
That would be a little bit difficult. And then goes on, inclusive of all officers, public servants, executive orders, treaties, constitutions, acts, the lot.
And contracts and agreements are now void, worthless, or otherwise cancelled, unrebutted.
It sounds pretty clear and concise to me.
The cognitive dissonance on the part of a lot of the people who you'll give this to will occur at the suggestion that the governments are corporate. And this plays directly into the reason why you made that video about the Australian government and the fact that it is one of these corporate governments.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the beauty of what I've done in that sense is we've got a tool now to be able to put to those in the so-called government and see if you get an answer. I mean, if you write to one of your ministers or your representatives and ask them for the evidence that they are actually operating in a lawful environment and specify what you'd like to see to demonstrate that, you can go through that same process, and I bet pounds to peanuts that you're not going to get the evidence that they are a lawful government. I mean, we've gone 12 months here with 50-odd ministers and governors and governor-generals, and they're getting blatant enough to write back now and saying, we will not provide you the answer to those questions.
Well, as a taxpayer, I can tell you that is absolutely not good enough.
No.
Now that was the process you were originally working from, which relied on a flaw in the Australian situation. On the other hand, we've got literally a court case, because of the UCC more or less acts as a paperwork court, a court case where they were accused, tried and convicted of treason and then sentenced.
Yeah. Well, if you went along to if you got called along to a court and you sat there in the corner and didn't say anything, you know what's going to happen. They're just going to say, guilty, off you go.
Yep.
So what happens when they sit in the corner and don't say anything? Do we argue for them and try and research and try and justify their validity on their behalf whilst they're sitting in the corner dead quiet, like the little kid that sort of nicked the lollies off the table and no one noticed him and he's sitting there in the corner real guilty?
Yep. I'd rather irrevocably cancel them.
I think so.
As we do.
Yep. They had their opportunity to
rebut.
Put their hand up and say, look, we are legitimate, we are representing the people, we're not creaming off the top, we're not siphoning money out the back of courtrooms, we're not treating everyone as slaves, we're not, you name it, the list goes on.
Creating fraudulent birth certificate contracts, mortgages. In fact, everything they've done is complete fraud, because the whole thing begins and ends in fraud. So there's not one thing that they do which is done in full disclosure. So none of the contracts, the fruit of the poison tree at several levels, so none of the contracts are valid. But of course, you've got to put them through their courts, and of course, they make up the rules for those courts, so they won't agree. But this was done in another court by another process. And as you say, they were kept silent. And this is the result. You know, the next paragraph talks about it. Bank charters cancelled. declared and ordered irrevocably cancelled any and all charters for Bank of International Settlements, members thereto and thereof, including all beneficiaries, including all certain states of body, owning, operating, aiding and abetting private money systems, issuing, collection, legal enforcement systems, operating slavery systems, commandeering lawful value by unlawful representation. Bingo. So probably we should just move on to the next paragraph.
Yep.
Okay, I'll read it out. Said declaration of facts identified herein, restated here, remains unrebutted and stands as absolute truth in law, commerce and being, registered in public record, universal law ordinance for all the world to rely upon. See certain websites, okay, but particularly the www.peoplestrust1776.org, where all of these documents are up there for the public record.
Yep.
In fact, that was the their opening salvo publicly, was to make that website known. So this paragraph here really is just a statement of the conclusion of the case.
If I can jump quickly, that declaration of fact is well worth reading. Look that one up and read it. It's 12 pages, but it does go into a little bit more detail on what has gone on. And for example, when it talks about banks, we really get down to the fact that we're talking about all banks, all branches, the whole lot. What have we got? We're talking Bank of International Settlement members, any and all central bank, financial institution, corporation, and any and all international equivalents, and any and all members thereto and thereunder, any and all national, state and private banks, financial institution, corporation, and any and all international equivalents reorganised under central bank membership, and it keeps going. So
yeah, Heather speaks of, it's Heather Tucci Giraffe, the trustee, speaks of there being certain nexus points in the system they discovered where they were really the top of that particular tree, and it turns out the Bank of International Settlements was literally, you know, in some form or another, the owner of all banks.
yeah. So again, it encompasses all of them. It's not like, oh, we're the bank of Duck Creek, and we're exempt because we're not actually in that. Yes, sorry, looks like you are.
Yep. Because here's the thing. One thing I became aware of: you don't get to trade in the banking system unless you're constructed according to, or in a certain fashion according to guidelines put out by the BIS. You know, you don't get your SWIFT code until you can't trade on the system until you're one of them, in other words. So you've got to join their club, and having joined it, you've just gotten chopped. Okay, next paragraph. Accordingly, we're back into establishing this new relationship with the respondent. Accordingly, respondent is advised that they now act in the capacity of an individual entity without a corporate safety net and with full personal liability for every action they take under common law, protected and preserved by public policy UCC 1103 and universal law, the governing law laid out in the OPPT UCC filings. So this is their absolute warning that they're acting as an individual.
They're
and
flying
taking liability. Yep.
Yep.
Indeed. So pressing on, should respondent choose to act on behalf of a foreclosed entity causing proponent any damage as herein stated, respondent in their individual and unlimited capacity will be held absolutely liable. Such actions may result in lawful remedy being brought against respondent pursuant to public policy UCC 1-305, including but not limited to UCC commercial bill, which is a form of lien, against respondent's assets. And this is really putting it to the respondent, isn't it?
Oh yeah, yeah. If one of those lands on your desk, I wouldn't want to be receiving one of those. Then again, they do have a process to be able to respond and rebut if they're able to.
Well, and they can also remain silent and cease action against you.
Yep. Again, and yeah, exactly. If you sit there and do nothing, I'd say in a large majority of cases with a lot of people, if they got that response, in as much as they didn't get anything back, never ever thereafter, most people would be pretty happy.
Yeah, well, we've said in the guidelines, you know, our aim really is silence. We don't want to hear from them again. They need to cease the action.
Yeah, if they went and looked up the website and went, oh, hang on, I'm going to knock out my own courtesy notice to my boss now.
Yeah, well, they're actually one of the one people as well, and that's part of the point of the last page of the document, which we'll cover when we get through the rest of the first 3 pages.
Actually, ex-boss, I should say.
Ex-former boss, yeah, because you got to readjust all of these connections in your mind based on the new landscape. So next paragraph, further, respondents' attention is drawn to Declaration and Order, UCC Doc, etc., duly confirmed and ratified by Commercial Bill and True Bill, which states, volunteers within the military to arrest and take into custody any and all certain states or body, their agents, officers and other actors, regardless of domicile by choice, owning, operating, aiding and abetting private money systems, issuing, collecting legal enforcement systems, operating slavery systems against the several states' citizens, and repossess all private money systems, tracking, transferring, issuing, collection, legal enforcement systems, operating slavery systems. So this is a reminder or informing the respondent that ultimately the enforcement for this, you know, we've already told them they could have a UCC lien, but ultimately the enforcement is coming from you know, volunteers within the military who form a connection with the OPPT by choice.
Exactly. So it's a pretty nice reminder that look, the road ahead's not looking terribly good by continuing to aid and abet these private money systems.
Indeed, and that's the actual involvement with the military in the OPPT movement is certainly some time off. We'll touch a little bit on enforcement later in the discussion, but essentially our approach at this stage is we are the enforcement.
Exactly.
And we'll press on with the rest of the document, and then that'll come up a little bit later. Now the next line is, should respondent cease and desist in any and all damaging actions against the proponent, actions brought against respondent's assets shall be averted. So this is the let-out clause. This is the one that we want to use to bring them to silence.
Yep. Yeah. Basically, if you choose to go away, then we have no cause to issue you an invoice.
Except we'd actually point out that, as you said a minute ago, you can actually, you as the respondent can actually do exactly what's just been done to you.
Sorry, just say that one again. You as
the respondent in this case.
Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay.
The recipient of your notice.
Yes, could turn around and use the notice themselves in the same way that you have done, now that they know what's going on and what they've got available to them.
Well, I'm pretty sure that a large majority of the recipients of this notice, those respondents will have mortgages or other issues that I'm sure they'd love to, or I wouldn't say, can't speak out in advance on that, but one would think that
they'd think about it, for sure.
They could make use of that themselves.
Absolutely. And there's another paragraph here which I personally love because it's if you like, it's the catch-22. For them. Respondent is cautioned of its compounding and accumulating liability through instructing, directing or conspiring with colleagues in pursuing damaging actions against proponent. Should colleagues so instructed detrimentally damage proponent, they will be made jointly and severally liable through principal agent doctrine preserved by public policy UCC 1-103, and it is now your commercial and moral responsibility to inform them. It is your responsibility to investigate your liability and any potential future liability that is created by your knowing, willing and intentional free will choice to damage proponent. Proponent has made and duly given an additional courtesy notice to respondent. Original notice is a matter of record made and given by the OPPT, which is the sentence we pointed out at the start of this discussion of the courtesy notice. This is a really important paragraph, Scott.
Yeah. So a practical example is, say for example, you're dealing with a bank on a vehicle car finance. The bank goes and, or an individual working at that formerly known as bank goes and engages another individual who is working at a, let's just say, a debt collection company.
Former debt collection company.
Former, exactly. So now you've got two individuals involved. And what we're saying here is it's your moral and commercial responsibility to pass on these terms and conditions to the person that you've just gone and engaged or coerced into acting with you on this matter. So now there's two individuals involved, and your terms and conditions have been filtered down to that additional individual. So the liability that goes to the guy who's done the engaging is he's now liable for the actions of the individual that he's engaged and his own actions. So the likelihood is that his invoices are going to get rather heavy.
Invoices. So we're almost at that section now, and before we pass on, I'd just like to discuss the scenario that exists inside alleged corporations, because it's a similar thing. If you've got, for instance, the person in charge of issuing tax notices in a tax department, who might have 300 employees who are busy assembling and mailing out tax demands and making phone calls, etc., the liability for each of those individual actions lands on that person, because they are no longer the hierarchical insurance protected corporation, former corporation. They are in fact a group of individuals conspiring to do harm against other individuals by extortion, by extorting money with a threat attached, asking for money with a threat attached. And that liability is probably something they don't want to know about, but they're going to.
I suggest, yeah, you imagine being responsible for pushing the send button on a mail out of 5,000 notices.
Yeah.
And part of that slavery system.
Yep. And also, you know, if you follow that chain of logic, imagine the liability that the CEO of the Australian Tax Office, the corporation itself, mounts up minute by minute. Because it all goes straight up to the top. Well, it's no longer the top. It's basically travelling along a flat plane to an individual at the end of a group of individuals that he's responsible for instructing to commit unlawful acts. So, not a position you want to be in. No. So, I think the people get the message there, Scott.
Yes.
So let's move on. Okay. Next paragraph is another short but very pivotal statement. Should respondent choose to interact with proponent privately and individually beyond this date, proponent's terms and conditions number, whatever, are offered for respondent's acceptance, wherein the method of acceptance is clearly defined.
Yeah.
And that one sentence it leads to everything that comes next.
Exactly. That's the clincher that takes them from the you're an individual to here's my terms and this is how you can accept those terms. That's a critical sentence.
Indeed, and one of the critical things is that it's private and it's beyond this date. Okay, so it's the line in the sand, I think you describe it.
Exactly. Yeah, there'll be some folk who say, oh, can I invoice them for taking my car off me last week or doing whatever last week or last year. No, this is, you're noticing them from this point forward. You're offering them the terms and conditions. You can't invoice them for something on your terms and conditions that they did last week when they hadn't even seen your terms and conditions. It'd be like someone changing the sign at the car park that you drove into and putting the price from $2 an hour up to $10,000 an hour. And then when you drive out, they say, oh, you have to pay. See, look, it says on the sign there. And
shiny badge, you have to pay.
Yeah. So it's again, we're being respectful in this manner. As here's the courtesy notice. Here's your terms. From this point forwards, this is how the rules of the game are.
So then, Scott, the critical thing is what they do next.
Exactly. what's their action? So the actions are, is that where you're headed?
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll round out what's on the rest of the actual courtesy notice, the body of the courtesy notice. Let's move on to the action after that. Essentially, the next sentence is, respondent's attention is also drawn to positive benefits that the OPPT filings offer every person, foreclosed banks, cancels debt, etc. Now, new governance is here. See page 5 for more information. Take due notice and be governed accordingly. Essentially, we're pointing the person at a page of information, a précis, a summary of what the OPPT is and what it's done so far and where it's going. It's quite a good summary. Please read it yourselves if you haven't read it yet, because it's the sort of document you can actually hand to other people. Say, here, have a look at this. It explains it well enough.
Yeah.
And this is part of the intent of this document. You know, the intent of this is to courteously warn them that they may not be aware of it, but the situation has changed, and you give very specifically the reasons for the change and the new situation, and then you start to give them very specific instructions on how your future individual relationship will be conducted, and you're doing that in a very fair way, that they have a choice point where they can either act or not. And then you're saying, well, you really need to educate yourself, because this applies to you too, and that's a very important part of this message, and it contributes to the energy of the document. Would you like to speak a little bit about the energy of this document before we move on to the terms and conditions?
Yes, and just touching again on that intent, the idea is, as we said, courtesy, and going to that point, from this point forward, we're not worried about what's been done in the past. We're essentially forgiving that. So we're not necessarily saying it was good or bad. It's just, it's done, it's in the past, it's behind us.
Yeah, which is a really positive thing to do. You know, we can't be taking baggage into this new situation.
Exactly. So we're not going into it with revenge, going, "Oh, I'm going to make that guy pay." That kind of thing is one, not going to attract a result that I think will be an outcome that you really are looking for. And that goes now to the energy of where we're going with this. In many ways, this is a balanced document. We put the notice and the terms and conditions in place, which is, we were discussing this when preparing them. It's more of a masculine kind of a slap around the back of the head. Take notice, guys. Listen up. And then the page 5 has literally got the sort of, well, actually, it's not that bad. Have a look at this. Here's what has been done. This is how it benefits all the people. We've got the feminine balance that's come in to offset that. So that the energy that we're trying to get on this is twofold. One, it's the notification, and I'd say probably the most important thing is it's your opportunity to step into the water, get your toes wet, and do something.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that too, because the being and the doing are two very important aspects of the way we have energy exchanges. When we communicate, it's an energy exchange. When you buy something, it's an energy exchange. When you give this document to someone, it's an energy exchange, but that exchange can only take place if you do it.
Yeah.
You have to do it.
And a good example of how the energy goes to this, and this has come from some of the notices that I've been helping folk with. You can prepare 2 notices that are exactly the same for exactly the same circumstance. Let's just say a parking ticket, and you can submit that notice and have the energy or the intent that, oh geez, I hope this works. Oh geez, if this doesn't work, I'm doomed. Or you can have the intent of, well, I'm just submitting that, and here's my truth. This is what I believe in. I'm actually looking for the truth from the other party as well. So you've got 2 different energies there that have gone in with the same paperwork. I would argue that the outcome that you're going to see from the exact same document with completely opposing energies or different energies attached to that situation will be completely different. Would you agree with that, Chris?
I would absolutely agree with that. In fact, I'd like to pull Ken in at this point, because this is a discussion we've been having. And that's, this document's not going to stay still when you put it in an organisation, Ken. And so what's going to become of the energy as it's passed around, in your view?
Well, I think, again, taking up the point that Scott just made, it's the energy that you put into it. And the thing that I'd like the listeners to fully grasp here is to read this document, if necessary, half a dozen times. Go take the dog for a walk in the meantime, or shovel some snow off the driveway, or do whatever it is that you're going to do. Come back and read it again until you can actually feel the energy that this document's got in it. And then, when you send that document off to the recipient, that energy is going to pass through that document in the same way. And I think that the response you're going to get is going to be far greater. But to take your point and to answer your question, I think when that person gets it, the first thing he'll be doing is trotting off to his neighbour who's sitting at the neighbouring desk and say, have a look at this. Is this all bad, or is this fellow actually trying to tell me something that's of benefit to me? And could it benefit you too? Have a look and tell me what you think. So you'll pass that energy on just as if, rather more so than just the paperwork, if you understand.
Sure, yeah, and that's, we're looking to, we're not interested really, we're interested in identifying or notifying the sort of higher levels of all of these former higher levels. These, I'm not sure what to describe it, they're a flattened pyramid, I don't think there's a name for it, triangle lying on the ground. The guys up at the pointy end of this shape that's spread out on our landscape full of people, those guys know what's going on. It's actually all the guys in the middle that count, because they're the one people that don't know about this yet.
Yes.
They need to see these documents and ultimately to hear about this so they can make their own decision.
Well, that's an important point, Chris. And, the recipient of this notice is being put between a rock and a very hard place. But at the same time, it's still a courtesy notice.
And they can still simply cease and desist. And then that keeps their personal liability, that drops their personal liability from the situation, and will give them much pause for thought about what just happened to them.
Yes. Yes.
Excellent. So look, we're down at the end of the document, fellas. The only question I really had here, because it's one that occurred to me the other day, we've got a witnessed signature with a date. Could you carry a copy of this in your car, pre-witnessed, and then post-date the document when you actually use it? So the date at the start of the document would be, say, the day after the signature was witnessed. Is that a problem?
I would tend not to do that. I would say when you prepare a document, you prepare it in full at the same time.
Well, this goes back to the idea that we wait till we get a piece of paper rather than using it, on the street.
Yeah.
Yep. Fair enough.
You get complications. Even signing and witnessing mortgages, if the parties are not in the same place at the same time, you get complications.
Understood. Okay. Well, that concludes the detailed discussion of the courtesy notice body itself. And now we're on to the terms and conditions. Now, the terms and conditions and the schedule of charges, etc., are a very interesting part of this document, because essentially what we're doing is notifying them that their next action, after they receive this notice, if they take another action, it automatically triggers an agreement between us, a contract, which has ramifications. So take it away, Scott. Let's have a look at that.
Okay. So yeah, again, just going back to what we touched on earlier on, it's in the absence of there being a contract between the two individuals, you're offering these terms to form the basis of any future dealings between the individuals. So we've defined the type of response as to what we want to receive as in the way of the format of evidence to demonstrate there's a lawfully binding contract in place. That's under the heading sufficient verified response. Essentially, you don't want someone ringing you up saying, what do you mean, mate? Of course we've got a contract. And as we said earlier on, it's not likely that's going to happen, as these individuals have been formally operating as governments or banks, and so they don't have contracts on an individual basis. They've previously been contracts company to you as a individual.
That's a very specific situation where you would literally have to have had signed a personal contract for some reason between yourself and the exact person you were serving this on, which is just not going to happen. It's one of the things we have to talk about, but it's the possibility of it is almost zero. So looking at the terms and conditions page, we'll go through it the way we've done with the document, so we're thoroughly covering it. Top right corner, terms and conditions reference number. Now this is the number that you assign it. You know, you can make up your own number, and this number needs also to appear as part of the end of page 2 of the courtesy notice itself, where you actually state the number of the terms and conditions. Now, we're numbering it obviously so there can be a cross-reference.
Yeah, so basically your terms and conditions, because this document is going to be used by thousands and thousands of people, we didn't know a reference number for each one of those. Make it up yourself. You can use the date and put it in reverse order. You can use your letterbox number. You can use your uncle's birthday. You can use your cat's birthday. It doesn't matter. As Chris said, the idea is the reference number on the terms and conditions is linked to the courtesy notice, or more particularly, the terms and conditions are associated with the courtesy notice. So you've got a document to refer to by reference number. And you'll see the similarity in the UCC filings, where all of the UCC filings have got document reference numbers.
Indeed. In fact, the other place the reference number will probably appear is on the invoice.
Exactly. So it'll be along the lines of, in accordance with terms and conditions XYZ, issued on this date, received on that date, here is your invoice.
Exactly. So heading down the document, we've got the same sets of respondent private details, proponent private details, exactly what you put on the front page. It then defines the parties, or speaks to the parties. These terms and conditions are applicable to the above named parties, also including but not limited to colleagues acting for or on behalf of the named parties. Again, that's linking in that liability, isn't it?
Yeah, so if we go back to that example earlier on, if that debt collector, the individual pretending to be a debt collector, his or her name can be put in there as the respondent, even though you originally didn't address the courtesy notice to that individual, because that individual has been engaged by the person that you sent the original courtesy notice to. That's the chain of liability as it's come through.
Good. Now, heading straight into applicability, whereas all banks and governments have been fully foreclosed upon.
Sorry, Chris, just to go back on that, might be worth clarifying that. These terms and conditions only need to be issued once if, in that instance, I was jumping ahead to where I was thinking about invoicing.
Okay.
So the terms and conditions, the name and the details on there will be the same as the courtesy notice, issued once to that individual.
Yep.
You may choose, if another individual becomes involved, to write out a separate set and deliver that to them separately, even though he might be liable underneath or through engagement from the first guy. It's just another courtesy directed this time to that one.
Exactly. Okay, applicability. Whereas all banks and government have been duly foreclosed upon, respondent therefore acts in capacity of private individual. So what we're saying is that we're applying the terms and conditions to this situation. In absence of government statutes or bank or other corporate contracts, the only instrument that will compel conformance between private individuals is a lawfully binding contract. In other words, we're pointing out that the landscape's empty, the only thing left is us, and so if we want to compel performance, there has to be a contract, and this is it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So next section, respondents' responsibilities. It is respondents' onus and responsibility to provide proof of claim in the form of sufficiently verified response of a lawfully binding contract, presumed or claimed to exist between the parties. Additionally, any claimed contract must possess all elements of a lawfully binding contract, including but not limited to offer, acceptance, true reliance statements of fact, intent and consideration, and that these elements have been knowingly, willingly and intentionally disclosed to proponent. Now, what they're doing is saying, they're saying to you, if they send you say a fine for not paying council rates, what they're trying to tell you is that you're a straw man, you're a chattel of the system, we say you've done something wrong and therefore we're holding you to it, but in fact that situation simply does not exist anymore and they cannot provide a sufficient verified response of a lawfully binding contract. It just doesn't exist.
And if I can add to that, Chris, and you'll find this on the very first line of their document or even on the envelope that it came in, is the fact that they still believe that they are government or a bank. So yeah. On the very top of the document, I mean, we gloss over this quite quickly in a lot of realms. We see Australian government on the top of the letter, or even on the outside of the envelope, or whatever bank name on the outside of the envelope. That now is the fact that you've now got a document from them that says they're claiming to be what's just been foreclosed.
Indeed.
And you haven't even opened the envelope yet.
Yep. It's an admission. Well, it's absolute evidence of the fact that they. And you'd have to say knowingly, because at the tops of these organisations, they all know what's going on, yet they're still sending out letters pretending to be banks or government.
Exactly.
Of course, and it's unlawful.
That's the beauty of it. You can do half of this just by looking at the envelope.
Yes.
And what we get bogged down is when we open these envelopes and we go straight past all the logos and the names at the top, and we start getting into the detail. And a perfect example is a friend of mine who's had a mortgage situation where he's been challenging the debt, is that put to him a default notice with an astronomical figure on it, which I believe was designed to have him dispute the number rather than the actual underlying existence of a debt. So he opens the envelope and sees this massive number and goes, oh, but it's not that, it should only be this. And the instant he says that is they've just gone, oh, well, okay, we'll pay it then.
When it should have been, you can put any number there you like, the debt doesn't exist.
Exactly. Yeah, so don't get bogged down in the detail, is look at the underlying principles. Has the bank, has the government been foreclosed upon? Yes or no? If yes, then anything that falls out from their creation has also been foreclosed on. Game over.
Yep. Love it. So they can't produce a sufficiently verified response. They just cannot because of the events that have taken place. So pressing on here, absent a lawfully binding contract, this document notices a contractual good faith offer of terms and conditions between the parties upon which upon acceptance will form a lawfully binding contract between the parties. Okay, so this document in its entirety is an offer of contract.
Exactly. It's no different to the coffee shop who's put their prices up on the blackboard.
Yeah, and it's also this is an interesting one. It is respondents' responsibility to inform and advise any colleagues. Notice we're using the word colleagues, not subordinates or superiors or anything like that. They're just colleagues, acting for or on behalf of respondent of these terms and conditions. Now,
spread the word.
Spread the word. It's their responsibility to do it. And again, that's another something else that speaks to the line, the chain of liability going on here.
Yeah, Exactly.
Now, the next line is actually the most interesting one in the whole document. It says, see Schedule A for contractual obligations arising from acceptance of these terms. But we'll go and see Schedule A in a minute, and we'll move on to a little bit more detail. Sufficient verified response. Owing to the seriousness of the matter, only a response that meets the following criteria qualifies as a sufficient verified response. Response must: 1. Be duly registered, verified and sworn documentation of standing, authority, value and rebuttal of every point with specificity and particularity. Exhibit written delegation of authority signed by the respondent if response is by another. Use words defined with common dictionaries, e.g. Webster's, Oxford. No correspondence will be entered into by telephone. Do you want to quickly step through those 3 points, Scott?
Sure. Basically, we're not looking for something written on the back of a napkin. We want something that can hold up if, we're talking about evidence here. And the seriousness of this matter, as we stated, is right up there. So we're looking for duly registered, verified and sworn documentation of standing. And that's going back to what we said on the first page of the courtesy notice about our standing of being the sole lawful legal registered owner, custodian and trustee of my being. So we've said who we are. This is who are you? What's your standing?
Indeed, because our standing is guaranteed by those filings, and part of our standing is equity. And the situation that they're claiming couldn't be further from that.
Oh, exactly.
Or they're alleging, shall I say.
Yeah.
Now, the second point?
Yep, exhibit written delegation of authority. Now, perfect example of this is in the engineering world. If an engineer produces a drawing, he'll sign off on it, and that engineer is responsible. So if anything goes wrong with the equipment that was built off those drawings, the insurers and courts and all the rest of it go back to who signed off the drawing. Now, if that engineer is not at work, then what happens is the engineer will create a delegation of authority that will delegate his signing authority for the responsibility of those drawings to another engineer. And that provides a document trail back to be able to follow all the way through to who was the responsible person who signed off on it. So if you get a response that comes from someone that you didn't write to, then where's the delegation of authority that allowed that individual to write on behalf of the individual that you wrote to?
So you could write back to them and say, who are you?
Well, yeah, send them a courtesy notice.
Yeah, that's actually also covered in the Schedule A listings as well, I think.
Yeah, there's briefly in there.
Yep. So use words defined within common dictionaries. This is to force them to not use legalese, I presume.
Well, I wouldn't say force. They've got the free choice not to use words within common dictionaries. However, you've said that you're only going to act upon words that are used in common dictionaries. So you've laid it out pretty clearly that these are the terms that I wish to deal with. They can do what they like, really, and there are consequences to the actions that they choose to do.
Now, you've slipped in no correspondence will be entered into by telephone in this spot. This is just to force them to have them consider the option of only communicating with you in paper form. Yeah,
and a perfect example of that is the banks when they get, say, with credit cards. They'll get on the phone and they're calling you left, right and centre for overdue payments or anything like that. Now, most of the time, they're recording their conversations. You're not equipped with the facilities to record those conversations, and chances are you end up with the short end of the stick. So by saying no correspondence will be entered into by telephone, there's a couple of advantages. One, the correspondence is written, which means you've got written record of what's happening, whereas by telephone you don't necessarily have the record of what you said. Additionally, when you're dealing with telephone matters, your anxiety and control of your own being is sometimes impaired a little by adrenaline. So if you're dealing with paper and written communication, you've got the opportunity to take things at your own pace. You can say, I'm going to go walk the dog and think over this document that I've received in the mail and let me become inspired. And you might come back and write the invoice in a completely different mindset than if you had them on the telephone and you're reacting and you're flying off the handle and doing all sorts of things, and it's a spur-of-the-moment reaction and just stuff's coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, it gets back to the sort of energy levels in play under those circumstances.
Exactly. So if you viewed that sentence there as no correspondence will be entered by telephone, it's almost like hitting the pause button on your reaction and turning it into a response.
Yeah, very good. So now we've got two very interesting little, very short paragraphs, method of rejection, method of acceptance. Now, method of rejection, they've received this courtesy notice, they've got a free will choice to either accept it and reject it. And this is the prescribed methods for the purposes of triggering this contract. No contract shall be considered entered where respondent does not do or perform any of the actions listed in Schedule A. No action, no contract. Method of acceptance. A lawfully binding contract is knowingly entered into by respondent or any of their agents doing or performing any of the actions listed in Schedule A. Action is acceptance.
Yep, that's, I suppose if we pull back in the example of the car park, a perfect example is the terms and conditions are posted on the outside of the car park. If you drive into that car park, it's deemed that your action of driving into the car park is the acceptance of those terms. Similarly, if you say, oh, don't like those terms, don't think I'll drive into that car park, you turn around and go somewhere else, your action is representative of the fact that you didn't accept their terms, you went somewhere else. Are you there, Chris?
Muted, yes, here we are. If your client, if your customer in this case, does an action, is Ken making lunch back there?
Yep, he's been creating all sorts of mess.
So we're both having a little audio things happening here. Interesting. So if they do something that's on the actual Schedule A, and it's one of the acceptance actions, a contract is triggered and in place at that point.
Exactly. It's as simple as that. It's an action performed that represents the acceptance. It's a manifestation of acceptance.
And the terms of acceptance is the next paragraph. Acceptance is with respondent's consent to the following. And this is actually the items I'm about to read out are what the respondent is expected to do, which is to agree with all terms and conditions stipulated herein, unreserved acceptance of charges payable stipulated in Schedule A, respondent irrevocably and unconditionally waives any and all rights of objection, immunities or defences. So it's pretty strict. And you wouldn't want to be taking this contract, would you?
Well, I wouldn't want to be stepping into this one. And what we're saying there is you can't change your mind halfway through.
Exactly.
You're either driving into this car park or you're not. You're not sort of, I might drive in a little bit and maybe I don't have to pay.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is an aspect which we will discuss, which is the waiver with the invoices, but we'll have a look at that when we, that's sort of that's the emergency reverse out of the car park for them, would you say? The waiver on the invoice?
Or the parachute.
The parachute. Okay.
Mm.
Well, we've done methods of rejection, acceptance, and terms of acceptance. Let's pop onto Schedule A before we talk about that parachute. Now, Schedule A, first of all, defines currency, and you've got $1 defined as 1 troy ounce of proof quality silver bearing the coins $1. Now, 1 troy ounce of silver is actually, what's it worth at the moment? About $40?
Depends on your national currency, but yeah, I think it's around about, spot price is around about 30 Australian dollars, probably about 32 or something US dollars.
Okay, so we're looking at the fixed charges list. So the first one is $2,000. It's actually 2,000 ounces of silver. So
Yes.
it's 2,000 in dollar value. It's 2,000 times 40, if you wanted to measure it in dollar value.
Yeah, your minted coin cost will be close to the 40 mark, yes.
Yep, there you go. So it's actually, the fines here are actually a lot larger than you guess just by looking at the dollar value there.
Just fines, not really. They're
yes, no,
the
true.
prices
Correct.
or the
they're charges.
charges for the services rendered.
Yep, that was just me
It's the,
slipping into the old
yeah.
paradigm.
Yeah.
Great stuff. So collection fees for any unpaid invoices are additional. That's pretty standard commercial stuff. Then we get on to the fixed charge list. Now, this is a 12-point list. That is 12 items on here, which are fixed charges. Then there's a two-part list, two-item list, which are variable, or if you like, daily charges. And we'll whip very quickly through the 12 items just so that you can, it'll be absolutely crystal clear to everybody what the item actually means. So I'll read it out, and if you want to give us a quick thumbnail of what it means, okay?
Yep.
Okay. Any claim absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties.
Right. So a perfect example could be parking ticket again.
Yep, that's a claim.
It's you owe me this.
No contract in place.
Exactly.
Number 2, enforcing or attempting to enforce any prior issued instrument from a foreclosed entity.
Right. Now the importance here is this is something that's been issued previously, prior to them receiving the terms and conditions. However, as we said, we've drawn that line in the sand, given them the terms and conditions, they now have the choice of how to act from that point forwards. In this instance, their action is, actually, I'm going to pursue this guy for this charge or infringement or amount, whatever. They have then performed an action to enforce something that's originated in the past.
But by making an approach to you to try and collect payment, that isn't of itself counter to this. It's actually counter to this contract, and therefore you can invoice them for that action.
Correct, and it is also actually an instance of point 1. So they've come to you again with a claim absent a lawfully binding contract. So
Yes.
you may find that you get one serve of, or one order of point 1, and just for good measure, I'd like another order of number 2, enforcing or attempting to enforce any prior issued instrument from a foreclosed entity. If you visualise it like someone's in a coffee shop, they're going, I'll have number 1, thanks, and a number 2 to go.
On the same invoice.
Yeah.
Yes, because folks, if they contact you, they trigger this contract, and the outcome of the contract is that they're invoiced, depending on what it is that they do. So you'll be sending them invoices every time they try and contact you any further on that issue. And if they start up a second issue, say another parking fine, the process would begin again.
Correct. Yeah. And worth mentioning at that point is how you view those individuals who are contracting with you by accepting your terms. They're essentially customers in your coffee shop.
Exactly.
How many owners of a coffee shop have you seen actually shooing customers out of their shop? An example of that would be you standing there saying, "You can't do that." You're putting up your resistance, falling back into the old, "You can't do that. That's a abridgment of my rights," and all the rest of it. Yes, it is. And you've also offered them terms and conditions where you've said, "I'm happy for you to do that in exchange for this amount of, in this case, silver."
So these fixed charges are actually a free will choices statement by you.
Correct. There's two sides to this. It's your willingness to experience that matter or that action by the other party in exchange for a certain monetary value, in this case.
Energy.
Yeah. And in this sense, it's a deterrent for them performing those actions.
Yeah.
But I think most people, if they went through that list, wouldn't put their hand up to say, I'd be happy for someone to come and do this, perform these actions against me.
Indeed. Well, number 3 is enforcing or attempting to enforce judgment from a court.
Yep. So fairly self-explanatory. You get papers in the mail that says we've got a claim against you, we've got a judgment, we're trying to seek a judgment. That's the enforcing or attempting to enforce a judgment from a court.
Number 4 is engaging any third-party service absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties.
Yep, that just goes straight back to our debt collector example. You might have another one with, say, for example, the tax office. Hilariously, they use private debt collectors themselves, or did. So anyone who's engaged another individual, it's almost like, well, thank you for introducing a third party to the equation. Here's your invoice.
Very good. Number 5, breach of privacy, including but not limited to each or any form, notice or letter addressed to anyone other than the proponent at reply address noted on each presentment.
This is a classic. Essentially, a good example is a friend of mine received correspondence via tenants of the property that they were renting out, and it was addressed to the homeowner, and yet the owner lived at a completely different address. That address was on the contract of this mortgage and had been corresponding backwards and forwards, and a document had been sent to the rental property addressed to the homeowner, which put the fear of God into the tenants that all hell was going to break loose, which was essentially a breach of privacy.
Indeed. Fair enough. That works well. So number 6, unlawful physical or non-physical threat, including but not limited to a threat of prosecution, restraint, bodily harm, legal action or detainment.
Yep, fairly explanatory. We're going to take you away. You will receive. You will hear from our lawyers. We will file an action in the court. There's a whole manner of examples, and essentially whatever falls under the category of a non-physical threat.
Yep. Number 7, unlawful physical harm, including but not limited to restraining proponent or inflicting bodily harm, unlawful arrest or detainment.
Same thing. This time it's a hands-on effect.
Yep, where they've manhandled you, which they are not entitled to do, and hopefully they haven't done any damage, but they still are not allowed to handle you.
Well, they are in exchange for a rather hefty sum of energy or money.
Yeah, it is quite a big one, that one. Quite big. Okay, number 8, unlawful repairable damage to proponents' private property or goods instigated by or caused by the respondent.
Same sort of thing. May well be they say, oh, we're going to crush your car or damage your property. anything like that. It might even be seized goods at customs that they damage as a result of having held them unlawfully.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's pretty obvious. Number 9, unlawful destruction of proponent's private property or goods, including but not limited to irreparable damage.
Yep.
Self-explanatory.
Again, yeah, anything that's been confiscated and they say, okay, we're going to dispose of that or destroy it.
Yep. Number 10, unlawful claim of ownership of proponent's private property or goods, including but not limited to sale or auction.
Right, so this one covers someone actually claiming ownership of your own property. So a manifestation of that from personal experience was customs sending a video projector back to the country of origin where it came from. So, and rejecting it on my behalf. They said, look, it was rejected by a recipient, being me. So in order for them to do that, they had to be the recipient, meaning they were claiming ownership of that item.
Mm-hmm.
Might involve some fairly rare sort of circumstance, but it might come up.
Very good. Now, number 12, each telephone call made by a respondent in the pursuit of any claim absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties.
Actually, we jumped past 11.
Oh, sorry. Yes, we did. 11. Action against another not party to these terms and conditions, absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties.
Yep. So if they go and threaten or perform any one of those actions against someone else, another example of that was a friend was driving without a license, and the police actually went and hassled the owner of the car rather than stopping the driver. So ironically, that driver had already submitted terms and conditions to the police, and it's thought that the police didn't want to incur an invoice, so they thought, well, let's go and hassle the owner of the car and give him some grief.
Uh-huh. Little did they know. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now we're on to number 12.
Yes.
Okay, each telephone call made by a respondent in the pursuit of any claim absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties, which cements that no phone contact comment.
Exactly. And if you received a text message as well that says, oh, your account is seriously overdue, please contact XYZ Bank quoting reference number blah, 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 I'm sure there's a few people who've been able to relate to that circumstance.
There's a note here. Without a lawfully binding contract in place, any fee, charge or invoice levied on an incremental basis, including but not limited to containing any interest component, will be treated as though a separate invoice. Units of increment will determine number of incidences invoiced.
Right. So a perfect example is when you get a parking ticket and they try and collect the ticket plus they charge you an admin fee on top of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've previously treated each one of those as a separate incident. So you've got two items there to invoice. Point one, at any claim absent a lawfully binding contract. So you've got the original infringement and then you've got their admin fee that they want to charge on top.
Mm-hmm.
Another one might be where someone says, if you don't pay, we're going to levy your account at X% per day, or charge you a $20 overdue fee each day.
Yep, separate fee for those, because that's a claim made against you with no lawfully binding contract in place.
Exactly, and each unit of increment, in this instance daily, is you cop another invoice for each of those increments of what the charge is being made of you.
And they're doing it to themselves.
They're accepting the terms of your contract, or the terms and conditions that you've offered them.
Yep, good stuff. Now, in the variable charges, number 13, we've got seizing proponent's private property or goods as surety for payment of any claim absent a lawfully binding contract between the parties. And I note this is per calendar day.
Yeah, so if, for example, let's move to a mortgage situation where a property was foreclosed upon by, ironically, one of the foreclosed banks, and they seize the property, then I'd invoice for each day that the bank has seized your property as surety for the payment of a claim where they don't have any lawfully binding contract with you.
Yep. Excellent. And number 14, each day claim is made against proponent's private property or goods, including but not limited to registering a lien absent a lawfully binding contract. Again, a calendar day event.
Yes. Now this one's very similar to the point 13. Instead of them actually physically seizing it, they're making a seizure that is almost like a paper seizure. So, for example, say a mortgage was registered over a property, you couldn't sell that in the ordinary course of events as we're in today. You're being prevented to, your free will is being abrogated.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a claim that's made over your private property, and this term here is to say, well, we will invoice you for each day that you maintain that claim over my private property absent the lawfully binding contract.
Fair enough. I don't think that would happen to many people, but it's a good clause to be in there. Now, changes to terms and conditions. Very simple. Terms and conditions may change at any time. Respondent will be offered new terms that will supersede and cancel any previously issued terms and conditions. So they don't get to say what the terms and conditions are going to be.
No, and if anyone wants support for that, go have a talk to Apple with iTunes or Google.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they do.
Yeah. So summing up the situation,
Sorry, lost you, Chris.
Muted again. Summing up, a person receives this notice, we hope, reads it, digests it, realises that they've started an action against a private individual on their liable, and that if they proceed further, this contract will spring into life. And it will not stop them from contacting you, but will generate a charge against them personally every time they trigger the terms and conditions in the contract by contacting you or doing anything in a manner that's listed in Schedule A. Is that a fair summary of the whole thing?
Yep, exactly. Yep.
So whilst this, at this stage, this is you being the enforcement, you're actually doing a discouraging action. Your first action, submitting the courtesy notice to them, is in and of itself an action to discourage their action, their future action. And for every future action they may decide to take, you discourage it by actually sending them an invoice.
Yeah, yeah. The bit that you touched on about the enforcement is, yeah, this is one form of enforcement. You are taking an action yourself. You're pointing to facts that have been filed by the trustees, the foreclosure of the banks and the government. You're pointing at that and saying, it looks like you guys don't have your corporate safety net anymore. You're acting as individuals. How can you act in any other capacity if your company's gone? And absent a contract between the two of us, I'm going to offer mine. And if you'd like to accept my terms, all you need to do is perform one of these actions, and I'll happily send you an invoice.
Exactly, and of course the next step beyond this, should they persist and should they continue to harass you, ultimately, and this is something that they could be reminded of, on the invoice every time you send it, is that continuance of action and failure to pay invoices may ultimately result in a personal UCC lien against you, because that's the next stage, that's the escalation point for this. Exactly.
And that's probably worth touching on more with regards to the energy is, let's just say you send an invoice off for an action that's the acceptance of your terms and conditions. And the letter, and you get a letter back from a high-profile legal firm that says your claims are baseless. You're like, well, okay, First off, was there any rebuttal of the filings that were made in Washington, D.C.? No.
No, well, technically there's no need for the filings to be rebutted because they lost that job, they lost that opportunity
True.
in 2012.
Where I was going is the absolute irony of a lawyer writing to you saying your claims are baseless, but does not provide any basis for that statement itself.
Yes.
They write to you and say your claims are baseless, and absolutely offer no evidence to support that statement.
Mm-hmm.
Get it? And you get variations on this. It'll be the items raised in your letter, and they'll belittle the fact that you've sent them an invoice by calling it a letter and putting inverted commas around it. Don't expect instant necessarily. Who knows? We only wrote this just the other day, so it may well surprise you.
Yeah. Well, this thing, you know, if a lawyer, if this is passed to a lawyer, and they don't look up the filings, you know, they could well start coming back with silly things like this is baseless. But if they do, they're not going to have a very pleasant time of it.
Well, correct, and you can thank them for accepting your terms and conditions and send them an invoice again.
Indeed.
And from experience, what I've found is that in some instances it takes 5, 6. In one particular instance with my car and customs, it's up to I think about 16 invoices. So it takes a little bit of getting the idea across to them.
Yeah, well, that particular exercise was being done on your original process based around their abuse of the original Australian Constitution and their deception of the Australian people.
Correct.
This is the whole planet and the treason of the whole system against the one people. This is a much, much bigger accusation and impossible to rebut because they've missed that opportunity.
And the power and energy behind this one is like
steamroll. It's a
avalanche.
Yeah, it's huge. The last thing we need to do, Scott, is have a quick review of the invoice sample in the instructions, just so we can see the relationship between the original document, the terms and conditions, and the final result of it if they trigger an invoice by continuing to act on the matter. Pretty straightforward invoice. We've got the respondent and proponent listed in exactly the same form, some standard payment terms and due dates. We've got a statement here relating to the initial declaration of fact, which says, whereas the foreclosure of all of the world's banks and governments is recorded fact unrebutted, declaration of facts, etc., and no sufficient verified response was provided, which we asked for at the start of the terms and conditions. It was provided demonstrating a lawfully binding contract between the individuals named above. The terms and conditions were offered within proponent's terms of conditions, and then there's the conditions number, which we referred to before. The methods of acceptance were clearly defined. Respondents is invoiced for their actions arising from respondents' action in pursuit of an unsubstantiated charge. And on this particular sample, you've got 3 items: absent any claim, enforcing or attempting to enforce a prior issued statement, and seizing proponent's private property. They've got a date listed for the third one because it's based on calendar day. The others, it's not applicable, it's just one fee. You've got the rate, the quantity, the amount, and a total. And then there's the waiver. Now, I'll read it out in full because I don't think we need to comment on the invoice. It's pretty easy to recognise how we're relating it back to the original document through the terms and condition numbers and the items that you're stating that come out of Schedule A. But it's the waiver that we need to look at here. If within 14 calendar days of recorded receipt of this invoice, respondent is able to provide a sufficient verified response, which will be 1, proof of claim of a lawfully binding contract between the individual parties named above as required in terms and conditions, reference number, whatever. Or 2, provide irrevocable written withdrawal of action itemised above causing this invoice to be issued. This invoice will be waived. No payment is required. Any invoices issued prior remain payable. Payment terms. Payment is demanded forthwith in satisfaction of this invoice. Proponent will accept delivery of physical coins to the total stated herein by any secure carrier authorised by whatever as payment. So the waiver is in fact, that's the parachute we referred to earlier.
Exactly. It's again another aspect of the courtesy that you're offering. You're giving them that option. They've essentially jumped out of the plane. They've gone, I don't care about what this guy's got to offer. I'm going to get in there and do this anyway. I believe my corporation's still solvent. I'm still getting a paycheck. What do you mean? Of course we are the bank or government. So they jumped out of the plane and taken that plunge and performed the action. Next thing you know, an invoice lands on their desk. Now, for a lot of people, I'd suggest that an invoice addressed to you as the individual, spelling out that you're now liable for this, your company's not going to pay it, it might encourage you to go and have a look into the validity of what's going on. And this waiver provides them a certain safety, or not safety, a period of time that they can pull the parachute and bail out, and they actually will land safely without charge. That's basically that one.
Very gentlemanly thing to do. Now, obviously, we would hope they would do that immediately they receive the first invoice, so that it's just all over. You know, there's no invoices to be paid. They've just withdrawn from the action.
Exactly. And I suppose the good thing about this one is, whilst these guys are acting in their individual capacity, it's not like withdrawing from that action is an indictment of their company and their ability to collect on that debt. That company's all done and dusted, foreclosed, gone. So they couldn't make it any worse for that company.
Former company.
Yeah.
Indeed, and it's really, the whole situation is really, it should be no reflection on them, because they're acting from a position of ignorance, which we're simply trying to put right, without any due damage being done to us on the way through, and ensuring that they clearly know the reality of the situation that they're in.
One thing I will, I think is important to add on this, Chris, is and I use this letterbox example quite often, is you think of the feeling of anxiety that a lot of people experience when they go to their letterbox and they open up the lid and they pull out this official looking envelope, and or you pretty much know what's in it. There's going to be a demand for you to do something or pay something, and the fear factor is quite high. What we're doing in this process is we're turning the tables here. What we're doing now is, when you go out to the letterbox and you open that letterbox, having served this courtesy notice and your terms and conditions, is you are now looking in your letterbox for customers. If there's a official looking envelope that arrives in your letterbox, it's likely that someone's just accepted your terms and conditions. You've got a new customer. So I think if you look at the feeling that you experience when you approach the letterbox from that point of view, is like, well, oh wow, look at this, I've got another customer. Brilliant. I'll pop an invoice out and let's get going with this.
Absolutely, and you know, the whole point of this is to realise that the old paradigm is over. It's just over. What we're faced with, our job from this point onwards, is educating the people who are operating the remnants of the old paradigm, so that they're aware of their free will choice to act, to ultimately step away into the OPPT's new governance structure. I clarify. I don't like calling it a government, a structure of assistance centres, whatever we choose to call it. This new entity system that's been created for us to step into is a worthwhile destination that everybody needs to know about. And the last page on the courtesy notice can't be underestimated in its importance, because the energy in that is, again, terrific, and that will have an impact on anybody who reads it, because the information is just so gobsmacking.
Exactly.
If I may use that very visceral term. And
I think you'd be very well allowed to do that.
Very good.
So, I don't want to stop you.
No, it's the whole situation is quite extraordinary and totally unprecedented on this planet at every level, which is why we're taking it as seriously as we're taking it. Now,
and at the same time, if I can add, introducing an element of fun.
Absolutely, yeah. You can just imagine the different reactions that different people are going to have to this thing as they read it.
Yeah.
And I suspect that a lot of people will simply never hear from that entity again.
Exactly.
Which is the desired outcome, and we've put that, we've expressed that in the guidelines. The desired outcome is silence from the system. We don't need to be hassled by them while we're setting up this new paradigm for the one people.
Someone put a question forward, Chris, in relation to opening the document and reading it, and they said, can we get a courtesy notice with a little video camera in the top corner to record the expression on their face when they read it?
Yeah, and email it back to you?
Yes.
Yeah, great. I'd love that. So if anyone out there comes up with that, let's get it going, because then we'd have a measurable, measurable in the sense of an observable effect. Occasionally people will be serving these personally, and they'll certainly see an observable effect if it's read in their presence. So this is a really exciting ride we're in for, folks, and we're thinking very hard about other things we can do with this approach. Would you like to speak to that, Ken? Scott?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that one. There's a couple of different ways that we might be able to evolve this notice and instances we can use it for. And one is, for example, folk that have been held in persecution. I'm sure in whichever country anyone's from, there will be an example of someone that's being held against their will in custody on some trumped-up charge by a foreclosed government. And up until now, a lot of us have struggled with how do we help that person. We're looking into the aspect of being able to develop a notice that will assist in that circumstance.
Well, the basis would be the way that the trust bound every living human into itself in equity, and that to harm one of the one people is to harm all of them.
Exactly.
That would be the principle on which such actions would be taken. And the enforcement would be by us. It would be a case of, okay, someone's desk somewhere in the world gets, a million emails, for instance. Well, that would crash their server to start off with, but what we're looking to do is the Berlin Wall effect.
Exactly.
Because we are the people and we have the numbers.
Yep, and it's not like we're being unreasonable. It is pointing out at the courtesy of what's happening, and you're saying that is harming me, as I am the other person as well. We are all one. You're performing or breaching trust, because the individuals that we're sending are also part of this new paradigm.
Indeed.
They're all just like us. They are still in that realm, unfortunately, of not having had the memo, as we like to say.
Yep. Indeed. And look, that's something that we're thinking about, and we hope we can, make headway on that over the next weeks. And there are other things we're working on as well, which we won't preempt just at the moment, because yet to come to fruition. But that was just to give you an idea of the sorts of thoughts that we're having about where we can go with this, and it's pretty exciting stuff. But the most exciting thing is that we know there are tens of thousands of people out there who have problems and who need something to deflect the attention and the claims, the unlawful claims they're getting from the system. And this is the tool to do it with. And if we do it in, the greater the numbers we do it in, the more effect we'll have on the people inside the system. And ultimately what we're trying to do is push this whole issue into the mainstream media by the weight of our numbers. That's what we're aiming to do. And again, we're like the 100th monkey or the 3% theories. I don't think the number's going to be it won't be in terms of millions of people, actively doing stuff. It'll be a number much lower than that. So we just have to get out there and start mailing these out. You can, for each individual action, there are probably more than one person you can mail this to. Obviously, got to send it to at least one. And don't forget, if you're a husband and wife having a foreclosure, you both send them out individually. It's individual to individual. So if you've got a legal team, working for a bank, each person on that legal team gets one from one party and one partner and the other partner, and so it goes. The multiplication factor is what we're after.
That's a good point, Chris. You might find, for example, you get these letters that have come from those prior companies or the former companies, signed Gaydon's lawyers or whatever. They've got a website, and quite often they'll list all of their partners or counsel and all of that sort of thing.
You mean all those Gaydon's lawyers that put their name, that said, we are Gaydon's lawyers, and put that on the letter to you? They're all getting one of these, are they?
Well, why not? You could write to each individual that works at that foreclosed place and say, I don't know which one to write to. In that case, you're all it.
Yep, that would lead to a very interesting reaction from them. But look, I think we've gone a lot longer than we'd hoped, but I think it's been fairly thorough, and we hope you stayed with us until the end, because there's every chance that this kind of document, in fact, will really push this to the fore and get it out into the public sphere for all to see. Any last comments, Scott and Ken?
I would say have a read, print it out, read it, feel it, see if it sits well with you, and if your inner self is telling you I like it, dig out a potential customer and pop it in the mail.
Excellent. Ken?
Yes, I echo Scott's thoughts in there. The other thing I'd like to point out too is if anybody's unsure of how those instructions apply to using the courtesy notice, there are 1 million people on the net now that know about this. All they've got to do is put their hand up, send someone an email and ask the question. There's a whole army of people there that will be able to provide the answer.
That's it. We'll be posting audios as we go for these kinds of documents. They'll be in the FAQ section of the OPPT, the opt-in website, and also to be found most likely on Kauilapele, American Kabuki, and Releasing the Shackles websites, and they'll be posted around the place elsewhere as well. You should be able to find them fairly easily. So it's good night from Ken and Scott and myself, Chris, and we'll see you out there in the new lawful landscape. Cheers.
Thank you, Chris, and good night.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.